Thank you all for coming to the Iowa City Public Library this evening. My name is Maeve Clark, and I'm Coordinator of Information Services here at the Iowa City Public Library. And welcome again to Weber Days at the Iowa City Public Library and our second WOW, Weber on Wednesday event. All of the articles Irving B. Weber wrote for the Iowa City Press-Citizen are available online at the University of Iowa's Digital Library through the cooperation of the Iowa City Host Noon Lions Club, the Iowa City Public Library, and Lolly Eggers. Lolly had a collection of all of Irving Weber's articles from the newspaper, and the ones that were not in the 8 volumes here, the Iowa City Public Library scanned, and then the University of Iowa uploaded. So you can read every article Irving ever wrote for the Press-Citizen online. And I did that today, and that's how I found the article in Volume 4 about East Iowa City. Irving Weber died in 1997, barely missing a century of life. If we've piqued your interest in local history or exploring your family's history, please take a trip to the second floor of the library. We have many fascinating items on Iowa City and Johnson County, as well as materials on how to research your family story. When we started planning for the 2014 Weber Days, there was one program I had heard about that I really wanted to have at the library. The program's title, How East Iowa City Came to Be, caught my attention immediately. What a perfect program to have to learn more about local history, and the fact that I also live in eastern Iowa City made it even better. Dr. Thomas Schuline presented the program as part of the History for Lunch series at the State Historical Society. Tonight, we are fortunate to have Dr. Schuline here to tell us more about East Iowa City. Tom served 28 years on the faculty of the University of Iowa's College of Dentistry, retiring in 2007 as associate professor. He is currently historian for the Old Capitol Chorus in Iowa City and for the Central States District of the Barbershop Harmony Society, which has over 2,000 members. He also shared with me that he is interested in the history of passenger rail in Iowa City, Lustron homes, of which there are 7 in the community, and the Chautauqua movement in Iowa City. I hope we might persuade Dr. Schuline to share more of what he knows about Iowa City in the future. Now, on to East Iowa City.
Thank you, Maeve. I was doing quite a bit of research on dental history and some lecturing and writing about that, and it wasn't until very recently that I really got interested in Iowa City history, even though I've been a resident here for 34 years. And last December, I don't know what impelled me to do this, I started delving into East Iowa City. And I went to the Historical Society and talked with, what is her name there? The lady who is kind of Mary Bennett. And I said, Mary, would there be some outlet for something like this in the community? I have an opening next month, she said. So I busily got going on the project, and certainly well over 100 hours of work spent on this. And so here I am, and we're going to talk tonight about East Iowa City. Instead of waiting till the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about sources right now. In doing something like this, I delved through an awful lot of material. And I want to tell you right away, I certainly don't know all there is to know about the subject. I found out more things just in the past couple of weeks. I've met Brian O'Hara, who has enlightened me with things that I didn't know about, and he's in the audience tonight. But anyway, going through all of these things has been a lot of fun, a lot of work, a lot of individuals whom I talked with as well. And so tonight we're going to talk about a man named W.F. Main, who's kind of the central figure in this story. Spent quite a bit of time building up his story. I'm going to talk about the founding of East Iowa City itself, a jewelry factory that once existed in Iowa City that many of you perhaps don't know about, the Burlington Cedar Rapids and Northern Railroad, which once had its presence in Iowa City, is no longer here. The Rundle edition, I have heard it most commonly pronounced Rundle, although some have said Rundell. I'll stick with Rundle for now. A nursing home that has had quite a history. Carl Chaddock, whom I imagine most of you were acquainted with at least by name. And then we're going to talk about East Iowa City today. Let's start out with our story about the kind of the main character, W.F. Main, Willard Main. This man was born in Minnesota. I'm presuming from rather humble beginnings. And as he stated in sort of a mini autobiography, he moved to Iowa from Minnesota when he was about 12 years old to escape Indian unrest. The first year, or 12 years of his life, he had no formal schooling. He lived in Cerro Gordo County when they moved from Minnesota to Iowa. Before moving to Iowa City, he was a hired man, a corn husker, a farmer, a thresher, traveling salesman, constable, assessor, owner of a jobbing company in Rock Falls. Now that's the thing that kind of leads us into what he got into. He said he was the owner of a jobbing company. I thought this was a neat certificate, his marriage certificate from 1882, when he was 23 years old, marrying a Janet Roebuck in Rock Falls, which is in Cerro Gordo County. So he arrived in Iowa City in 1888 at the age of 29 and apparently studied law for 1 year. And then he established an office in Iowa City. These are little clippings from the Iowa City Directory, the city directory from 1891, talking of where his office was and his residence. He started with a capital of $1,000 in the wholesale jewelry business, sold nearly $2 million worth of goods in the next 10 years. And he bought a jewelry factory in Providence, Rhode Island from a Fred Pennell in about 1893. He perhaps had backers and investors to get himself started. I don't know. But he did come about quite a bit of wealth, apparently, in a very short period of time. This was the advertisement he had in the Iowa City City Directory in 1893 through 4, showing probably a very exaggerated size of his factory out in Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, it looks just massive. And it talks about his address in Iowa City, and he was located at Friendship Street and Eddy Street in Providence, Rhode Island. And we know we have a Friendship Street in East Iowa City. I'm guessing that perhaps he got the name from that, but I don't know that. But he decided to build his own jewelry factory in the Midwest sometime in the late 1890s, already having this jewelry factory in the East. He wanted to be more centrally located. He had business throughout the United States that he had built up. So he got offers from various communities offering him incentives such as reduced taxes, cash bonuses, and different things. But he thought Iowa City was his hometown. He had a lot of real estate interests in Iowa City, a lot of connection with Iowa City, so he really preferred to build in Iowa City. And he did then decide on Iowa City for his factory. This is a map of Iowa City in 1889. He purchased about 300 acres of land in 1898, which were parts of, or the entirety of, the Thomas Wales Farm. We have a Wales Street now in East Iowa City, and the Abner Bradley Farm. We have a Bradley Street in East Iowa City. These are located in the area which is in the, just west of the Hy-Vee store on First Avenue in Iowa City. He made what he called a contract, whatever that meant, with the people of Iowa City, stating that kind of like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back type of thing. He was going to build a factory here if the lots were sold. He was kind of conditioning it upon that. He had 400 lots that he was offering. He was going to allow the people to purchase them in increments, perhaps 5 increments, one such as when the cornerstone of the factory was built, then when the walls went up, and then when it was equipped and so forth. He was trying to be lenient, seemingly. He would then grade the streets, put in trees and so forth, but he would build the factory here if the lots were sold, was kind of the condition. They were priced at these amounts, and they were generously sized lots at 80 to 150 feet. As it turned out later, the Rundle edition had smaller lots. But that's getting ahead of things a little bit. So he had East Iowa City, what he called East Iowa City, platted in 1898 by the city engineer. And East Iowa City ran, and still does, if we refer to it as it was, from First Avenue to 7th Avenue, from east to west, and from Court Street down to the Rock Island Railroad, or now the Iowa Interstate Railroad. I lost my train of thought, sorry. I show a Lee Street there where you can see right on here. Lee Street is no longer there, it is now in Manville Heights. These were the homes that predated East Iowa City. So as he bought this land, there were a number of residences on the property, particularly those of Bradley and Wales, and there were some others as well. This was a bird's eye view. They like to call these pictures in those days of East Iowa City. One of the interesting residences that I'll talk about later is right here on the corner of Muscatine and 7th Avenue. And this was the Wales residence right here. He was a stock breeder. And this was the Bradley residence. If you go down Muscatine, there's a rather large house there, not the one that's here, I believe, right now. That was probably torn down. And a very large garage or series of outbuildings in the back. It's a very expansive lot. This one, many of you are familiar with, and we'll talk about that in some detail. This is where he planned his factory, right here. And this is the railroad track called the Burlington Cedar Rapids Northern that no longer exists. And there's the Rock Island line, which was originally the Mississippi and Minnesota. I might not have that quite right. It was the M&M anyway. So that's a little bit about that. East Iowa City could be considered a rural subdivision, not really necessarily another town, although some people have referred to it as a town, but it was a separate entity that did not join in with Iowa City itself. So perhaps best we would call it a rural subdivision. And here we see it here on a 1900 map. And just north of it in pink is the fairgrounds. That was the second site of the Johnson County Fairgrounds. The first site was down just south of Paul's Discount. This was the second site, which moved in, about 1924 to the current location down south of the airport. Here were the boundaries of Iowa City in 1900. Maine lived in at least 3 different homes in Iowa City. This one later became a sorority house. It has now been demolished. This is at 932 East College Street. This is the home that was the Wales residence that is on what is now Friendship Avenue. It then became Maine's home at some point after he purchased the property. Do some of you recognize this house, even from this picture? Okay, here it is today. We think that this house, or at least the city, has it dating from 1880, which could very well be the case. When I went through East Iowa City over the years, I always wondered, what in the world is that big house doing here, completely out of character with the rest of the neighborhood? And then somebody told me it was once a nursing home, and I began to find out more and more about it. This is a picture, or at least an artist's conception, of the factory in Iowa City that was to be built. Again, I think exaggerated in size a bit. But he did indeed begin work on the factory by laying the cornerstone in 1899, even though the lots had not sold particularly well in East Iowa City as he had hoped. But he made the decision to go ahead and do it. He proclaimed that this would be the largest factory of jewelry in the whole United States, and later was even claimed to be the largest in the world. But anyway, it was of some note, obviously. Then Maine began publishing, at least on a couple of occasions in local newspapers, listing those who had paid for their lots already, those who had paid certain amounts for their lots. Was he trying to shame them or something? I don't know. But he very explicitly listed who had paid what and who had not purchased the lots, could be perhaps inferred from that. Then he came up with an open letter, which kind of stated his displeasure with the fact that people hadn't kind of lived up to their part of the bargain as he saw it, and stating that he was a little disappointed in that. The factory was completed. I don't think I found direct records of whether it was late 1900 or in 1901, but it was completed. This is a photo of the factory, which makes it look a bit smaller than perhaps the artist's conception was, but still a pretty good sized 4-story structure. It had its own water supply. There was not city water to it at that time. He was quite a promoter. He even formed his own band, claiming it to be composed largely of boys who are underage. And stating that it's now the leader in both popular and classical music in the city. Notice the newspaper that it was placed in, the Iowa City Weekly Republican. A Republican newspaper in Iowa City? But it turns out that he was the principal owner of that paper as well. Here's another picture of the factory with some little boxes. I think, Brian, you have one of these that you showed me, if I'm not or something else that was similar to that. Some of the main employees came from places like Goosetown, where he employed young women to paint china and jewelry. What kinds of jewelry did he make there? This is a listing of all the types of things that he had made. And in addition, at the bottom, he had display cases for salespeople and other types of things that were accessories for the jewelry. It was said to be not high-priced jewelry, maybe not real high-quality jewelry. I'm not sure of that in all cases, but it was apparently pretty decent stuff. And like I said, he had a market for this all over the United States, apparently. So here this man, by 1900, only 40 years old, was the half owner of a place called the Equitable Manufacturing Company, half owner of prosperous jewelry houses in Chicago and Minneapolis, the sole owner of a jewelry factory in Providence, Rhode Island, the owner of WF Main Company in Iowa City, owner of numerous properties, including farms in the Iowa City area, and the principal owner of the Iowa City Weekly Republican newspaper. He was quite successful, I'd say, to say the least. This was something that Brian O'Hare brought to my attention a couple of weeks ago, that this was one of Maine's farms near Iowa City, as it was written up here. It wasn't in Iowa City at that time. This was on US Highway 6. The old US Highway 6 was American Legion Road and Muscatine Avenue. And the so-called bypass became the main US 6 perhaps in the late 50s. I don't know. Some of you may know that better than I do. This home was moved, Brian, did you say twice?
Yeah.
This home was moved twice. But first of all, here's a sign on Muscatine Avenue by the old Seaton's Market proclaiming it to be the historic US Route 6. It was originally called Bloomington Road, that is Muscatine was, because it pertained to the city of Muscatine, which was formerly Bloomington. And there were a lot of Bloomingtons, so they renamed Bloomington to Muscatine in 1849. Originally, it was Casey's Woodpile. That farm that I showed you there is now the property of Windsor Ridge. And here was the house being moved, I think its final time, by the Lucina family. And now it rests in its place here out on American Legion Road, right, Brian? Where you took me to. Quite a movement of a huge home.
I think it was 142 tons.
142 tons. This was part of Maine's properties, which is right within the Windsor Ridge area, is it not, Brian? It's now for sale if you have $700 and some thousand. It's the Weinstein Gallery. This is interesting. Another WF Main farm, as if he had a ton of them. I don't know how many he had. And this was the Roebuck Main farm. His wife was a Roebuck. This is the one up in Rock Falls. This was an ad in the city directory in 1901 through 1902. Maine took on partners in March of 1901. At that time, the factory had over 100 workers. By October, they had 240 steady employees. Then, for some reason, he sold his interest in 1902. And it became the Puritan Manufacturing Company. Pardon?
Wondering why he sold.
That I don't know. Former partners Price and Lyon became the owners. But he continued to pursue the sale of his lots in East Iowa City, hoping to do so, of course, proclaiming such things as the wise man will invest now. He will sell these lots on installments. You can purchase a home on as easy terms as you can rent one. Later, it will bring a street railway. He had kind of promised, or at least hoped for a streetcar to come through there. The advantages of city life and only county taxes to pay. Well, that's true. The taxes were less. And the property is sure to increase in value. This was his proposed streetcar route, which never came to fruition. Then he talked about payments of 25 cents and up per week would buy a lot. The largest jewelry factory in the world in the area. The best class of people now living there. Taxes very low. This is in 1908. But along came in the same year, the Rundle edition from the Rundle Farm, which was just to the west, a little bit more than just to the, well, it did border East Iowa City, just to the west of East Iowa City. Now, they did promise a streetcar if 80 lots were sold in the Rundle edition. The streetcar was to go to the O.S. Kelly factory, which is down on Sheridan Road where the newer housing development replaced what was the drain tile business that was there in recent years. Started out as a farm implement company, the O.S. Kelly Company, which was a division of a Springfield, Ohio concern. This is a very busy map, I realize, but I want to show you what was going on that I think may have given Maine quite a bit of grief when he was trying to sell his own lots. Because look at all the development that was going on in Iowa City at that time. And I've put in gray the particularly large ones. The Rundle edition, 274 lots. Right here, right next to East Iowa City. The Sunnyside edition down here, 146 lots. Oaks first, second, and third editions, 46 lots. Chautauqua Heights, 70 lots. Manville Heights, what was called Manville, I think originally 100 lots. All in all, that was 765 lots that were being offered at the time that Maine was trying to sell the rest of his East Iowa City lots. That's a lot of competition. Then Maine ran an ad in 1910. A delightful, thrifty suburb, inexpensive homes swept by summer breezes. Lot prices will soon be worth triple their current price. He was quite the promoter. Now here's Rundle was also advertising at that time and talking about the streetcars coming in if the 80 lots were sold. Now, in 1910, a significant event happened in Iowa City history. They proposed to annex adjacent lands to Iowa City. This doesn't show too well because there's a dotted line, a dashed line or something in here, but let me show you a little bit better. There is the limit of Iowa City in 1910. This was roughly up to where Whiting Avenue would be in the north and Brown Street, the Iowa River, Oakland Avenue, and Friendly Avenue. That comprised Iowa City in 1910. This is what the proposal was for the annexation, which would double the area of Iowa City. And it would bring in East Iowa City and the Rundle edition. And it would also bring in Manville Heights and the Chautauqua Heights edition. There they are there. So in the newspapers, things like this were stated. Those who wrote in for the annexation said it would give a chance for expansion and development. Taxes would not be that much of a burden. But against, why should outlying areas be taxed more? City schools are almost crowded to the limit. And they said soon a state law was going to allow the county to have 50 to 75% of their roads paid for, and the city couldn't do that. And the extra taxes gained will not be able to take care of roads and bridges. Usual kinds of banter, pro and con. Well, the election was taken to the people both inside the city and outside who were eligible to vote, and it passed by not a tremendous amount, but it did indeed pass. A majority for was 102. In the city, most of them, of course, were for it, and outside the city, most of them were against it. So now the city had doubled in size in 1910. And this was an ad concerning East Iowa City. Property jumps to 4 times its value in 10 years. Again, one of Maine's promotions. Another promotion of Maine in the newspaper, not his paper, this was Iowa City Citizen, but he took out the ad. 50 cents down and 50 cents a week will buy you a lot. Schoolboys buy a lot, raise vegetables on it and sell them. Sell your lot later and pay for college. He also appealed to office workers, clerks, working girls, farmers. Boys and girls, write a letter telling how nice it would be to live in East Iowa City. Win a prize of $1 or even the $10, $15, or $25 prize if your ideas are good enough. Interesting stuff. Another ad of his, buy one of these East Iowa City lots. You can't lose. They are already going up in value. If you're any kind of a gardener at all, you can make $26 off of that lot and still get table vegetables enough. Well, here's a streetcar that already says Rundle Street on it. November 17th, 1910 is when the streetcar started its first operation. This was the line. It ran from downtown, down Burlington Street, down Muscatine, and down Rundle Street, and ended at the O.S. Kelly factory. Have you been down Rundle Street and noticed how wide it is? The streetcar ran down the middle of Rundle Street. Here's another ad by Maine then. As any enterprising boy can make it look after a few months' work. Put that boy on an East Iowa City lot and let him have some healthful outdoor work and honest companionship with his shrubbery and vegetables. You'll never have to worry over him. I got a kick out of those. Now Rundle lives up to the bargain, continues their ads. It said, we have made good. We sold the lots to you. We have put the streetcar through. East Iowa City grew quite slowly. I was looking through city directories, and even though the streets were named back in 1900, up till 1915, they used no street numbers, so you'd see somebody listed on G Street, for example, no number. They perhaps didn't number the houses yet. The 1922 city directory, 8 of the 9 residents on 7th Avenue had street numbers, but most of East Iowa City did not have street numbers for the residents. They were starting to be used with some exceptions by the 1930 city directory. 3rd Avenue had only 22 homes, whereas in 2014 there are 64 on 3rd Avenue. This was in 1930. And a lot of the streets were not paved until way late, maybe up into the 1960s. They had cinder-type surfaces on them. This map is hard to see, but it's an aerial view that shows that there are a lot of vacant lots, even in 1951. About 340 homes were built pre-1950, and about 280 post-1950. 1950s was the big build year. As you can see here, it's maybe hard to read the numbers down below. This is the 1950s. But even up into this century, a few homes have been built in there. Now, Mr. Maine established a Boston Piano and Music Company in Iowa City. I don't know if it had any connection with Boston, or if there was any company out in Boston. This was in the 1909 Iowa City City Directory. He also sold sewing machines with that company. And then, for what it's worth, some people tried to put Maine into bankruptcy, what was called an action of involuntary bankruptcy. Some legal people would be able to better explain to you what that means. I don't know. This was in 1911. Then another news clipping I found said that the case is making headway, I guess meaning that it was going to be decided. But I never found the results. I don't know what it was all about. Just throw it out just for the information for whatever it's worth. But he was still in business in 1960, and here he is with the sewing machine through the Boston Piano and Music Company. Then he decided to move his business office to Cedar Rapids, and I think also vacated his home in about 1918. Some of the mastheads that were on his letters in the 1940s are shown here. He got involved with the radio, phonograph, and penny vending machine businesses while up in Cedar Rapids. He was advertising for salespeople here. He was said to be the largest jobber of ball gum and ball gum vending machines in the United States. Quite the guy. An article that ran in the Iowa City Press Citizen in 1923 paid tribute to him, mentioning the fact that he was the largest jobber of ball gum and ball gum vending machines in the U.S. and so forth. So Mr. Maine died in 1950. He's buried up in Cerro Gordo County. There are some pictures of him along the way and at age 75. So he lived to be 85, 89 or so? Had a pretty good long life. Now, the factory, I haven't really explained very well about that factory. It sits where Carl Chaddock's property was. I guess you perhaps guessed that by now? But if not, I'm sorry I didn't mention that. Big empty lot now that he has no dirt pile, he's passed on. The family has still retained a business, but they've moved it out of town. Lone Tree. But that is where the factory was. And after it was a jewelry factory, it housed a lot of different things. 4 things simultaneously, maybe some jewelry along with perfume manufacturing, and even had a pearl button company. They had trouble down in Muscatine, a lot of strikes with the pearl button industry, and they've finally moved a concern or opened one up here in Iowa City. There was a Borner Fry extract company that made perfumes and spices. I just went black on my screen. Is anybody here? Let's see. Okay. Oh, this one's still there. Good, I can use this. Okay. My little screen one. Say again, please.
Werner Fry probably had connections with Werner Pharmacy.
Okay.
He was the first dean of the pharmacy college.
Very good. Okay.
It was located down.
Yes, I remember reading that too. Right. I can actually use this if we. Oh, it just
There you
touched. Sorry.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. So it went through a lot of different things, even perhaps a model airplane company, a sizable chair factory. And then the last thing that was housed in there was the National Hybrid Seed Corn Company of Anamosa, Iowa. They stored seed corn in there. Thousands of bushels of seed corn, of shelled seed corn. Then disaster struck on December 12th, 1937. A huge fire broke out that couldn't possibly be contained. It was found out about too late. The fire department arrived. The hoses were 300 feet from the closest hydrants. The pressure was low. It was cold. The water was freezing. The heat was melting snow and shingles on adjacent homes. The thing went up in just a spectacular fire. Complete loss. The contents were, I guess, well insured, but the building wasn't. And so what happened was, Carl Chaddock recounted that the corn smoldered, then would burn for more than a year. Big heap of smoldering, burning corn on this site. This is the property today, taken, of course, back in the war. I took this picture yesterday. Everything's so lush now and beautiful and green in Iowa City. Carl Chaddock established his trucking service in 1929, and he bought that factory property about 10 years later. Operated the business with his wife Frida for 75 years, and about 66 of those were spent operating out of that lot formerly owned by the factory. Died at 100 years of age. Here's a 1939 map now showing there's East Iowa City, and just west of it would be the Rundle Edition. The O.S. Kelly factory would be right here that manufactured the drain tile before it was torn down. Now you'll see north the Morningside Edition up here. This was the old fairgrounds. The Morningside Edition came in 1924. And it was interesting that an outside company, I believe in Sioux City, I think, Gary, your town, bought all of the lots apparently, or all the land, and they auctioned off the lots. I don't know the whole progression of how the properties were sold, but it was sold by an entity outside of Iowa City. Here it is in 1960. We see that there hasn't been a whole lot that has really occurred east of East Iowa City. There's East Iowa City outlined. We're starting to get a little development around the Friendship Street area that is just east of First Avenue, a little bit down by Southeast Junior High. And that's about it. There may have been some development south of the new US 6 down there. I don't have that portrayed here. Okay, so let's talk about East Iowa City today. Of course, it's gone way beyond what it was back in 1960, all the way out to Taft Avenue now, which is over here on the very edge of the map in yellow. It's comprised of part of First Avenue, and most of it's First through 7th, Friendship Street, part of that, and Muscatine, of course. All of A through J streets. J Street was originally K Street. There was no J Street originally. There might be some reason for this, but they numbered it or lettered it FGHIK. And 7th Avenue Court was originally Lee Street, but Lee Street is now in Manville Heights. It's now called the Creekside neighborhood or Creekside area with its own neighborhood association. East Iowa City is comprised largely of small homes, some very small homes. I don't know the percentage of small homes, but some of them are very, very small. This is one in particular that is about the size of a two-car garage at 546 square feet, built in around 1900. A sizable number of the homes were built in 1900 or around 1900. The city does not have accurate records of the build dates, so they do approximations, and it doesn't matter to them for tax reasons when they're that old. But I went through and I looked up every home in East Iowa City and found, oh boy, this is 1900. There must have been 75, and I thought, that's kind of strange. And they told me it's probably an approximation. We do have a number of large homes in East Iowa City as well. The one in the upper left being the original Wales home that was there pre-East Iowa City. Now, as far as the oldest homes in East Iowa City, these are kind of interesting. This is a very neat looking place on 4th Avenue right at Friendship on the northeast corner. And it was considered to be from 1890. Again, this may be an approximation, but we'll take it for what the city tells us it is. This is one you may be familiar with on Court Street, about where C Street comes out, and this is also declared to be from about 1890. The one on Friendship Street that we've been talking about that became the main residence was dated to 1880. I want to talk a little bit about the history of that house. It was probably built for the stock breeder who owned the farm Wales. Maine purchased it presumably about when he bought East Iowa City's land, occupied for about 18 years, and rented it out to people till about 1939. Have you heard of the Putnam Nursing Home? That was from the name Ernest and Stella Putnam, who rented the home initially from Maine, and then an attorney bought the home, an O.A. Byington, and the Putnams continued to rent it. It was known over the years as the Putnam Nursing Home, the Rest Haven Sanitarium, and the Putnam Nursing Home. They're down at the end, even after Stella Putnam Chamberlain died. She ran it until about the time she died, I believe. It was then split into 2 units in 1972, occupied by a number of different renters, probably for a good many years. Now the same person has ownership, or at least occupancy, for at least the last 7 years. It's quite a place, quite a big old place. So I thought, boy, that's old. And then I discovered this place, which also was on that bird's eye view that I showed you way back of the area in 1900. And I came to find out that this house on B Street is dated to 1870. But that's not good enough. There's one here. This is the house that was also on the bird's eye view. It's at the corner of Muscatine and 7th Avenue on the southeast corner. The city has this dated to 1843, which would be very remarkable because that's old. And Iowa City was platted in, was it 1839? And this would be one of the very early homes in Johnson County. And I take it probably existed as something quite different than we see today. Maybe a little shell that was built around. It's hard to say. Log cabins were built in those days. They didn't have lumber mills here yet, but it could have been ferried up on the Iowa River at that time, who knows. But that's probably not the 1843 structure. I've talked with the lady who owns it, and she has shown me her abstract. The first page does relate to 1843. It has information as such. Very interesting. We have colorful houses in East Iowa City. We have distinctive homes in East Iowa City. I don't think this is a Moffett home, according to many people I've spoken with, but it kind of is reminiscent of such a place with all the stones, and this is on Muscatine Avenue. This is kind of an interesting place with the flat roof. And then what about this place with these,
1927.
say,
1927.
this is?
Yeah, it is.
Tell me again, you mean the date or the,
1927 is the date. That was built.
okay. Do you know anything more about it?
I know the owner of it.
Oh, okay. It struck me as an interesting design. Are you familiar with Lustron Homes? This was one of 7 in our community that Maeve talked about. Now, if you can call me Shulin, I'll call him off. No, she got my name right today. This is a Lustron home that was built in the era of 1948 to 1950. We have 7 of them in the area. It's an all-steel home, a prefab home that arrived on one truck, was built on a concrete slab. Here's another one that is in East Iowa City on Court Street. We have odd structures, or at least one odd structure, the International Order of the Odd Fellows building. That was supposed to be a joke. This was formerly a church, but it's now the Odd Fellows. It's on C Street. We have, of course, a small business district in East Iowa City, a couple of different little parts of it. The Walgreens store sits on the site of a truck stop that was on old US Highway 6 that had its gas tanks above ground. We have a number of churches in East Iowa City and a railroad line that no longer exists in East Iowa City. This was the Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and Northern Railway. And this is how it ran through East Iowa City and Iowa City. Are any of you familiar with that? Yeah. Old rail, okay.
It ran through my backyard
Where were you located?
in the New Court Hill,
Where is that?
east of First Avenue,
Newport, is that up here?
out there. Keep going farther east.
Further east.
East of First Avenue.
East of First Avenue.
So you were out here?
Yeah.
Oh, past, yeah, it ran along along Ralston Creek, essentially down Friendship Street. And then it ran out of town up to Elmira.
The city finally took the railroad bridge down, but they kept the big stones, the pilings. and
That are in Court Hill Park.
playground area
Yes,
of the historic market.
yes, that's right. So loop up through here and down, and went down to the hills area, right there. The other railroad was the Mississippi and Minnesota. That became the Rock Island, and then now the Iowa Interstate. This is a view looking at the rec center to the south from the bridge above. What is that bridge? Is that College Street Bridge? Thank you. And this is what it looked like back in its day when the railroad depot was there for the BCRNN. It went out, it was called the plug line because it plugged into a system out by a little community called Elmira, which no longer exists northeast of Iowa City, just a little bit, about 8 miles out of town. And it was the way to get to Cedar Rapids and other places that you couldn't get to with the other railroad. So you would take one would take the railroad up to Elmira, and then it would go this way, then it would have to back up and back into this line, and then go this way up to Cedar Rapids. In 1904, the interurban came in, and that, of course, took away probably all of that travel that people did on the plug line to get to Cedar Rapids, and of course, it went to other places too. In this 1960 map, you can see evidence that the railroad was not, if this is accurate, was not completely torn out yet. In fact, I think they left it in town to get to a lumber yard somewhere in here. Some of you may remember that. But the track wasn't torn out until sometime after 1960 in parts of Iowa City.
Didn't that, track go in front of the restaurant on Iowa Avenue?
Yes.
College Street?
Yes, yes, it did.
That's a slanted front.
Correct. If you go down College Street, just west of 7th Avenue and look diagonally to the northwest, you will see this, which is where the railroad line ran. And this is evidence of the railroad tracks in the street right here on College Street. And here's what you were just talking about. This was what was once Doug's Diner, Midtown Restaurant, Made Right, Lou Henry, and Sonny Restaurant. The reason that this is angled here is because the tracks ran right up along, very close to this restaurant. And then they went down here and went by the New Pioneer Co-op and then into the rec center area. There are lots of empty lots yet, or seemingly there are lots of empty lots in East Iowa City. Lots of wide open spaces. I think there are some lots that have not been built upon. Perhaps the neighbors own them and enjoy that. Again, this is a very lush Iowa City of a couple of days ago. The south branch of Ralston Creek also runs through there, which has caused some flooding over the years. I don't know how big of a deal it was. I don't think it went out of its banks very far. It might have gotten a street, across that street at least.
It'd go up at least, almost 3/4 of a block from the creek up, and it flooded almost every year.
Used to
Oh.
flood First Avenue all the time.
Okay. Did the management job that they did in Hickory Hill Park have a lot of effect on ameliorating that? Okay. Yeah. Then there's a Creekside Park that was established in 1951 that we have. So the Creekside neighborhood has a lot of diversity. We see homes from 480 to 4,800 square feet. Build years from possibly 1843 up to 2006. Values of $91,000 to some $400,000. Questions I have. Why did Mr. Main sell his jewelry factory? I don't know. Why did he move his home and businesses to Cedar Rapids? What was the outcome of his bankruptcy case? I was just curious, but I don't know that yet. Why did East Iowa City develop so slowly? Well, possible reasons. Not enough factory workers could afford to buy lots. People perceived the lots to be too far from Iowa City. Wasn't very far. Streetcar went down Rundle Street and not through East Iowa City. And I suspect the competition from so many other lots that were being offered at the same time could have been a very big factor. So I've kind of come to the end of the line here. To summarize, I would say that East Iowa City was planned as a factory town with a streetcar route. And of course, it didn't get one. The developer, Maine, I saw is kind of going out on a limb, but he learned that many of those who promised to buy lots did not follow through. He may have become disillusioned with his project and sold out and moved his business to Cedar Rapids. The area got off to a slow start, and the early lot purchasers were largely of the professional business class rather than laborers at his factory, is what I've been able to ascertain. And he used some interesting marketing techniques. It did not remain a factory town, but slowly grew into an integral part of Iowa City. It's a very diverse neighborhood. It has a feeling of openness, I'd say, that's not displayed by the other older neighborhoods in Iowa City. And it's still not too late to build a home there. We have a lot for sale right now. I believe it's on 2nd or 3rd Avenue, fairly close to Court Street. We'll build to suit. Thank you.
Would you like to take some
I
questions?
sure would.
So we are live on Library Channel 10, so I need to hand you the microphone so that the people at home will be able to hear the question. So you have to bear with me while I find whoever has a question.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I find it strange that the avenues are numbered backwards.
Yes.
It would seem like 7th should be first and
Yes.
vice versa.
I suspect that's because it was outside of the city, and the idea was that they were trying to move toward the city from 1st to 7th. But that is a good observation. People have often wondered about that. I don't know what other ideas people have about that. Wally, as a realtor, do you have any thoughts on that?
No idea what
Okay.
I'm interested to know that the man's last name was Main, and there's no Main Street in Iowa City. There's a Main Street in almost every town and city in the country, but not in Iowa City.
Right. We have a church street, but no churches on it, but they originally had planned to have 2 churches on it in the original plat.
I was wondering if in your research you found out any reasons why so many of the homes in that part of town are built on the back of the lot on alleys.
No, I don't know that, but that's perhaps why the feeling of the big open space in the front of the home. Yeah, there's quite an extensive alley system throughout East Iowa City.
I have questions about 3 oddities in the neighborhood. One is,
Start again,
I have
please.
questions about 3 oddities in the neighborhood.
Okay,
One is that triangle around, it's called Friendship Square.
yes. Oh, you mean on where C Street meets Friendship?
It's like in that triangle between 7th, Muscatine, and Court.
7th Muscatine and Court.
Yeah, makes a triangle. 7th, Muscatine, and Court make a triangle.
Let me get my bearings here.
If you have a map on the screen, I could point it out to you. Well, it's locally
7th Muscatine and
it's
Court.
locally called Friendship Square. I don't know what its official name is.
I'm thinking, sorry, 7th Muscatine, let's get that first. There's no such intersection.
No, it's a triangle.
Oh, 7th Muscatine and
The
Court.
3 streets form a triangle. If you have a map on the screen, I could show it to you.
Oh, a triangle of land, which is not in East Iowa City, perhaps.
before East Iowa City. East Iowa City is right,
What's,
after it.
so it's not part of East Iowa City?
Right.
It was a different subdivision, and I don't remember, maybe 1924.
I think it might be, it's beyond the Oaks subdivision. Wales, here's 7th Avenue, the next street is Wales, the next 2 streets are Garden, so it's right on the other side of that.
Okay,
It's there, and there's
Yeah.
an alley that runs through, and there's a big triangular area that the people have
Oh.
gardens in. You can't see it unless
I know where you mean now, and there's an alley with speed bumps.
Yes.
And it has a central area that's owned by, in common, I think, with all of the peripheral residences. And they can farm in it or garden in it. That is an interesting little piece of land, yeah.
I was also curious about whatever happened to the Grant Court Bridge. And I guess there used to be a bridge leading to the tunnel called Dead Man's Cave.
Is this what you had referred to? He can address that.
Okay.
but not till he has the microphone. Yeah, but he was repeating what I said, so I knew what I was doing. Here you go, John.
Okay, the alley that goes from the old hatchery, which was on Jackson Street, that ends at Ralston Creek and the railroad tracks. And kids from the Longfellow neighborhood called it Dead Man's Cave. But it's actually a very old arched bridge with very old stone, and it looks like, you know, it was built when the railroad was made. And many of the maps that you displayed show G Street connecting with Kirkwood, and that apparently originally the Muscatine Road that came into town from Muscatine carried on G Street, and possibly I still haven't verified that it really was connected, because I haven't seen, I've looked for the history of this, and it hasn't been verified to me, just on many maps. And actually, G Street still has a setback that is consistent with country roads still today.
You mentioned that there were businesses and commercial areas in East Iowa City. Where are they, and what was there?
The little strip mall that's just east of the First Avenue Hy-Vee that has a Pizza Hut and a veterinarian.
A sewing shop,
There's a barber shop up on Muscatine and a knitting shop.
a knitting shop.
and Walgreens.
Was that the only one?
That's the area, yes. That's just right within that area is it. Right.
Wally, do you have a question?
There still exists a pass-through under the railroad, right in that, is that what you're talking about? Okay. It's still there.
Do we have more questions? Well, I guess we got to do a lot of local history sharing as well as a wonderful presentation. Thank you very, very much. I know that
Thank you. Thank you.
there'll be lots of talk about East Iowa City tonight and tomorrow and sharing of stories, since we're all so familiar with these homes that you showed us and this area, but now we know so much more. And so next year, maybe you can talk about railroads or the Lustron home. So we hope you'll come back.
Delighted to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.